I remember the first time I felt that whisper of unease in my chest. It was a crisp autumn afternoon, and I'd just finished my usual cup of chamomile tea on the porch swing. My daughter Emily called to ask if she could borrow a few $1,000s to cover some unexpected medical bills. Nothing too dramatic, just a routine expense, she said, and she would pay me back by Christmas. I believed her. I always believed her. Over the next several months, those simple requests multiplied. A down payment on a business venture with great potential, a security deposit for an apartment when a roommate backed out, car repairs, credit card minimums, even a last-minute flight home when grandma fell ill. Each time my heart squeezed a bit tighter, and I opened my online banking app with a sigh transferring the funds. Every thank you came packaged with a promise I wouldn't ask if I didn't need it. You're the only one I can count on. I clung to those phrases because they sounded like love. Yet something inside me began to shift. It wasn't a thunderclap of realization, but more like a slow dawn. I started noticing patterns. Emily never offered a timeline for repayment. Or when she did, the date would slip backward. She never invited me over for dinner unless she needed a check. And when I brought up my own needs, a new pair of prescription glasses helped with property tax. Her voice closed up like a door slammed shut. "Can't you handle that on your own?" she'd say, irritation running just beneath the surface. I kept a small journal, just a spiral notebook, where I recorded each transfer, the date, the amount, and the reason. It became a ritual, a line a week, sometimes two or three. At first, I did it to stay organized. Later, I realized I was building a silent ledger proof for myself that this pattern wasn't all in my head. By the end of the year, I had more than 40 entries. Altogether, I'd given well over $50,000. That number felt impossibly high. When I added it up one chilly December evening, I felt lightheaded. My savings, my hard-earned nest egg, had dwindled to a fraction of what it used to be. I can still see the fall leaves drifting across my front yard as I stared at the sum on my laptop screen. The shock wasn't that Emily needed help, she was my daughter, and I loved her. The shock was how easily I had said yes every single time. And when I thought back, I realized I'd begun to say yes before she even asked. My heart would race whenever my phone buzzed with her name, and I'd already opened the banking app, half expecting her next plea. That evening, I did something I had never done before. I paused. I took a deep breath and turned off my computer. I poured myself another cup of chamomile and carried it outside, sitting on the swing as the sun dipped below the horizon. My breath formed little clouds in the cool air, and for the first time in months, I didn't think about bank transfers or loan requests. I thought about how alone I felt. The next morning, I sat down with my coffee and that little spiral notebook. Line by line, I revisited each transaction. I underlined ones where she'd promised to pay me back and didn't. I circled the ones that came with a gentle insult. "You're just so lucky you can afford this," she'd said once, as if my ability was proof she had the right to demand. I couldn't help a small, bitter laugh. Lucky. At that moment, I felt neither blessed nor fortunate. I felt drained, used. I realized I needed help, not just more money because there was none left, but perspective. I called my friend Joan, whose son had struggled with addiction a few years back. She answered on the first ring. "I need to talk," I said, voice tight. Her concern was immediate. We met for lunch at the little cafe down the street where I poured out my story. She listened without interrupting, her eyes kind. When I finished, she reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "You're not alone in this," she said softly. "You know they call it financial elder abuse, when someone exploits your resources." The phrase struck me like a cold splash of water. Financial elder abuse. Me. Suddenly it all had a name, and I wasn't just being a pushover, I was being taken advantage of. Joan guided me through the basics. Look up the definition. Talk to a financial advisor, consider setting boundaries, and most importantly, trust my gut. If it feels wrong, it probably is wrong. Her calm certainty buoyed me. For the first time, I realized I didn't have to ride this wave alone. That afternoon, I called my credit union. I asked about setting daily withdrawal limits and adding a second signatory to large transfers. The representative was patient, explaining how I could receive text alerts whenever a transaction exceeded a certain amount. I thanked her, feeling a flicker of control I hadn't felt in months. But boundaries aren't built overnight. The next time Emily called, I found myself tensing before she'd even said hello. She asked for a $400 loan to fix her air conditioner. My chest tightened. The old me would have whispered, "Of course." The new me paused. I heard Joan's words. "Trust your gut." I closed my eyes and took a breath. "Emily," I said, voice steady. "I'm sorry, but I can't help you out this time." Her reaction was immediate. "Mum." "Come on. You know I have no one else." There was a tremor. Was it desperation or anger? "I've helped you plenty," I replied, calm but firm. "I need to take care of my own bills now." The silence on the line was so loud, I thought it might shatter. Then she said flatly, "Fine." I put down the phone and felt a wave of sadness, but also relief. It was the first real boundary I'd set. It didn't feel grand or revolutionary. It felt like the tight, careful closure of a door I'd left ajar for too long. Over the following weeks, I noticed changes. Text alerts popped up on my phone. Transfer of £1 to $200. Initiated or daily withdrawal limit reached. And instead of panicking, I felt grateful for the little safety net. Emily stopped calling as frequently. And when she did, the conversations were shorter, more measured. I heard no more guilt trips or off-handed jabs about how lucky I was. Instead, she asked how I was genuinely. And for a moment, it almost felt like old times. I won't pretend this journey was easy. It meant redefining my role as a mother, learning that caring for your child sometimes means saying no. It meant confronting my own need to feel needed to be the fixer of every problem. But each small step, logging that journal, installing those banking limits, practicing that single no, built a foundation stronger than any loan I could have made. And so here I stand, a little wiser with my spiral notebook still at my side, but with pages now dedicated not only to transfers, but to victories. The day I said no, the day I closed my laptop without transferring a dime, the day I felt my heart unclench. If you've ever felt that unsettled whisper of doubt, if you've ever wondered whether your generosity has been mistaken for never-ending entitlement, know this: you are not alone, and you can reclaim your power one boundary at a time. I still remember the first time I paused to wonder exactly what my generosity had cost me. It was a rainy Sunday afternoon in early spring, and I was curled up on the sofa, leafing through old bank statements. My daughter's requests had never stopped tuition for a certification course, a deposit on a new apartment, emergency dental work. The list went on. Each time I had reached for my checkbook without thinking twice. But now I held a stack of paper that felt heavier than any box I'd ever lifted. I started by tallying the obvious mortgage payments. Over 8 years, I had covered an extra £1,200 per month for her share of the house. That alone added up to $115,200. Then came property taxes, another $3,500. Annually, or $28,000 over those same years. Home repairs, roof leaks, furnace replacements. The air conditioner that died in July 2020 easily totaled another $15,000 when I dug back through receipts. Groceries for her growing family tacked on roughly $300 a month, or 28 hours. $800. College fees and kids' activities. Another $20,000. By the time I forced myself to add it all, the number stared back at me just shy of $210,000. The shock nearly knocked me out of my chair. $210,000. My heart pounded and my hands shook, but I felt strangely calm. That figure was the first honest measure of what I'd sacrificed. It wasn't pity I felt, it was clarity. I thought about my friend Robert in Austin. He'd shared his own story at an AARP meeting. His daughter's ex-husband skipped town, leaving her with child support arrears. Robert liquidated half his retirement account, nearly $80,000, to bail her out. Once. But Robert drew the line at doing it again. He told me he watched his account shrink month by month and realized he had to protect what remained. Otherwise, he'd risk running out of funds before his own medical bills came due. I remembered another case study I'd read in a financial newsletter, Mrs. Chen from San Francisco. Over a decade, she'd lent her son more than $150,000 to launch a series of pop-up restaurants. They all closed within a year, leaving her on the hook for unpaid rent and equipment leases. Mrs. Chen ended up facing eviction when her own condo's mortgage went unpaid. That story had haunted me, how quickly a parent's nest egg could vanish when good intentions went unchecked. As I sat there with my calculator and statements, I realized I'd made two big mistakes. First, I had never set any limits. I trusted that each emergency was genuine, that my daughter would pay me back when she got back on her feet. But promises are fragile, and life's curveballs, divorce, health crises. Job losses can derail even the best laid plans. Second, I had no system to track or review. I scribbled a few notes in my spiral notebook, but I never compared them to bank records or ran totals. Without that regular review, I unthinkingly authorized transfers until my savings had dwindled to nearly zero. That afternoon, I pulled out my laptop and searched for budgeting software. I settled on a simple cloud-based app that linked to my checking account and allowed me to tag every outgoing transaction. Within an hour, I had categories set up: home support, education, medical, childcare, and so on. Then I imported the past year's statements. I watched dispassionate as the bar graphs rose: home support $14,400, education $6,000, medical $3,200. Seeing it laid out in color made it real in a way those dusty paper statements never had. Next, I created a family loan register spreadsheet. Columns for date, amount, recipient, purpose, promised repayment date, actual repayment date, and balance remaining. I spent another afternoon filling it in, dating back 3 years when I still had easy digital records. Filling that register felt like taking back control. Every line was a marker of an agreement, an intersection of trust and responsibility. By the end of the week, I knew my limits. I set a threshold: no more than $5,000 per year in family support, and never more than $1,000 per request. I added a rule: any assistance over $500 required a simple written agreement, an email or text, acknowledging the amount and a proposed repayment plan. It wasn't a punitive contract. It was a reminder that money exchanged hands under terms, just like any other transaction. If my daughter balked, I could point to our own agreement rather than argue over feelings. The morning I tried this out, my daughter called asking for $2,500 to cover an unexpected vet bill and some car repairs. I took a deep breath and said, "I'm happy to help, but can we draft a repayment plan? I have a new policy. Anything over $500 needs both of us to sign off." She sighed, frustrated. "You're really doing this now?" But when I held firm, she agreed to a 6-month plan with $420 monthly payments. It wasn't ideal for her schedule, but it gave me peace of mind. I learned I wasn't the only one instituting these help, but with boundaries policies. My financial advisor mentioned he sees more and more retirees adding shared liability clauses to their check writing processes. 2 signatures required joint accounts with cap limits, formal cosigner arrangements. It all sounds austere, but it beats risking one's own security. Of course, mistakes still happen. The other day, I accidentally transferred $600 to her account on autopay before I'd updated the threshold. My phone buzzed. Alert transfer of $600 to Jane Smith. I caught it just before it processed and cancelled. The relief was visceral. It reminded me that automation can be a double-edged sword. You need a fail-safe to guard against your own routines. There's also the emotional cost to consider. Putting limits felt awkward at first, like I was refusing a blood relative rather than exercising self-care. I wrestled with guilt. Was I being selfish? But then I remembered what psychologist Dr. Linda Kramer once told me at a workshop. Self-preservation is not selfishness. It's necessary. You cannot pour from an empty cup. Framing it that way eased my conscience. I even found myself repeating it when the guilt crept in. Over time, a curious thing happened. My daughter began to respect the boundaries. She started budgeting her own expenses, even creating a small sinking fund for emergencies. She sent me occasional updates. Paid you back another $100. Saved up $500 for next quarter. Those words warmed me more than any vow of loyalty ever did. She was learning to stand on her own. I also made a point to reward myself when I hit milestones. When the balance on her loan register dipped under $1,000, I treated myself to a massage at the spa. When I locked the autopay limit successfully, I treated myself to flowers delivered to my door. These small celebrations reminded me this journey wasn't about punishment. It was about regaining balance. Looking back, I see that the invisible costs of my generosity were not just financial. They were emotional weeks of restless nights, a creeping sense of anxiety whenever my phone lit up a lingering doubt about my own stability. By calculating my total sacrifice and erecting clear limits, I reclaimed not only my nest egg, but also my peace of mind. If there's a lesson hidden in all this, it's that we sometimes underestimate what our small favors can accumulate into. A few hundred here, a few thousand there. It's easy to rationalize each individual act as necessary, but over years, those acts can redefine our retirement, erode our savings, and leave us vulnerable. By tracking the cost-setting sensible caps and requiring simple agreements, we protect both our resources and our relationships. And so I keep my budgeting app and my loan register close at hand. Each time I contemplate another transfer, I think of the $210,000 I tallied that rainy Sunday. I think of Mr. Johnson's cautionary tale in Austin. I think of Mrs. Chen's painful eviction warning us all. Then I review my spreadsheet, check my automated limits, and decide, does this really deserve another chapter in my ledger? More often than not, the answer is no. That's how I've turned my generosity into a sustainable gift, one that doesn't cost me my future. I sat in my daughter's old bedroom, now my makeshift home office, with a cup of mint tea growing cold at my elbow. I'd spent the past 2 months rebalancing my finances, setting boundaries, and rebuilding my confidence. But one thing still felt raw: how to protect what remained of my estate and my hard-earned savings from any future attempts at rescue that would leave me adrift again. So the following Monday, I dialed the number of the elder law attorney my friend Joan had recommended. Mr. Harper's office smelled of leather-bound books and polished wood. He ushered me into a cozy conference room and offered me a seat across from a tidy mahogany desk. Mrs. Ellis, he began, sliding a folder toward me. You've already taken the most important step by recognizing the need for a plan. Now we'll tailor the right set of tools. He laid out 4 documents: revocable trust, irrevocable trust, last will and testament, and power of attorney. I listened as he explained each in turn and realized I'd always thought of estate planning as one thing when it was really a toolbox of distinct instruments. Revocable trust came first. Think of it as a file cabinet you keep unlocked, Mr. Harper said. You can add, remove, even change beneficiaries at any time. The assets held in a revocable trust pass to your heirs without probate. He sipped his coffee. Cost is moderate, usually $1,500 to $2,500 in legal fees, and you maintain full flexibility. But because you control it, creditors or a disgruntled heir could challenge it. He gave me a real-life example. Mrs. Young in Denver had created a revocable trust in 2019 to avoid probate for her 3 children. When her eldest son ran into debt disputes, creditors filed a motion claiming the trust assets should be reachable for repayment. Because Mrs. Young still had the power to revoke the trust, the court allowed the creditor to access the funds, Mr. Harper explained. Next was the irrevocable trust, the one I'd read as trust you can't undo. He placed a heavier binder on the desk. When you transfer assets into this trust, he said you legally give up control. That shields them from future claims lawsuits, even long-term care costs in many states. But you must be certain, as changes require either court approval or a co-trustee's consent. Fees ran a bit higher, around $2,500 to $4,000, because of the extra drafting and tax advice involved. He described the Martinez family from Sarasota, Florida, who'd placed their family home into an irrevocable trust in 2021, when their youngest child's ex-spouse threatened a lien over an old debt. The trustee produced the deed, showing the property belonged entirely to the trust, no contest possible. The home remained safe. We moved on to the last will and testament, a classic. Your Beatle names guardians for minor grandchildren, allocates personal effects, and can set up smaller testamentary trusts. It was the least expensive tool, under $1,000 in many cases. But every asset not held by trust still went through probate, which was public, took months, and cost court and attorney fees. I remembered my neighbor, Mrs. Dalton, who passed away in 2018 with a simple will. Her property, not trust held, became entangled in a year-long probate dispute among distant cousins. After legal bills, the estate netted far less than she intended. I didn't want that for my legacy. Finally, the power of attorney POA. Mr. Harper explained 2 kinds: durable financial POA and healthcare POA. These let a trusted agent step in. If you become incapacitated, he said, you avoid guardianship proceedings, a judge appointing someone you might not choose. He recommended having both. I envisioned writing my longtime friend Marion into that role, confident she'd honor my wishes. After he finished, I had him set an appointment to draft both an irrevocable trust and the POAs. For the irrevocable trust, I decided to fund it with certain investment accounts, my secondary property across town, and a modest cash reserve assets I could live without controlling directly. In our next session, we detailed the trustee succession plan, my grandnephew Marcus, age 30, then my friend Joan, then finally the charitable foundation I supported. Over the next few weeks, I met with Mr. Harper to sign dozens of pages. The legal language felt dense, but he patiently walked me through each, whereas and there too confirming I understood. When I hesitated at the clause transferring my vacation home, he reminded me gently, you can still live there, you just don't own it anymore. But it's protected. In parallel, I prepared my power of attorney documents. I chose a healthcare agent to make medical decisions, specifying that if I ever became incapacitated, I did not want prolonged life support. Those were my mother's final wishes, and I wanted consistency. For my financial POA, I listed Marion with a backup successor if she couldn't serve. As the ink dried on the POAs, I felt a curious mix of relief and loss. Relinquishing direct control over assets felt strange, like giving away part of my identity. But I reminded myself it was the same identity I'd nearly lost by overhelping. Now I would have guards against future erosion. A month later, I sat again in Mr. Itzard Harper's office to finalize my last will and testament, appoint guardians for my two grandnephews, should anything happen, and bequeath certain sentimental items. My mother's brooch to my niece, my wedding band to my daughter, although she no longer managed my finances. We also set up a small testamentary trust for my granddaughter's education, funded at $25,000. Finally, Mr. Harper handed me the bound packet. "You're all set," he said with a smile. "Remember to review every 5 years or after major life changes, marriage, birth, divorce, or any significant health event." I nodded, already anticipating another check-in when I turned 75. Driving home that afternoon, I reflected on the range of tools I'd now assembled: the flexible, revocable trust I'd declined, the protective, irrevocable trust I'd funded, the clear directives in my will, and the trusted voices empowered by my POAs. It felt like building a fortress around my newly reclaimed nest egg and my well-being. That evening, I cleared my dining table and spread out copies for safe deposit, my personal files and my new apartment's fireproof home safe. I emailed Marion to let her know she was my POA and arranged to meet for coffee so she could ask questions. I called Marcus to thank him for agreeing to be my trustee. Even Emily received a gentle notice: Mum has made adjustments to her estate plan for peace of mind. "Let's talk if you have questions." I expected resistance, but Emily simply said, "Okay, Mum. I understand." It was the first time she'd responded without anger or guilt. I realized that having a clear legal framework removed the emotional tug-of-war. A few days later, my granddaughter Sophie asked why I was writing so many documents. I sat her on my lap and showed her the trust paperwork in simple terms. "It's like putting your toys in a treasure chest with a lock and giving the key to someone you trust, so no one can take them away by mistake." She nodded solemnly, then hopped down to play with her dolls. I sipped my tea and looked around my tidy living room, feeling grounded. I had woven a safety net beneath me, one made of law, transparency, and mutual trust. It felt different from the old safety net of unconditional giving which had run threadbare. This net was sturdy, flexible, and honest. None of it erased the past or made up for the anxiety of depleted savings. But it offered a path forward, a way to honor my love for family while safeguarding my future. And that I realized as I tucked the last document into my safe was the greatest gift I could give myself and them. Next, I'll share how I found the words and courage to speak up, set firm boundaries in conversation, and rebuild my relationships on respect rather than obligation. I never imagined that saying the word no could feel so powerful, yet so terrifying. It was a chilly Wednesday evening when I first decided to put my new communication skills to the test. I'd spent the previous weeks reading articles on setting boundaries, watching short videos from family therapists, and even practicing in front of the mirror. "I'm sorry, I can't. Let's talk about a plan. I need to take care of my own budget right now." But nothing prepared me for the moment when my daughter Emily strode into my living room and asked for help again. She'd just called 20 minutes earlier, pleading for $3,000 to cover unexpected tuition fees. I'd already reached my self-imposed annual cap of $5,000, mostly spent on emergency car repairs and a family dental bill. My stomach clenched when I heard her name pop up on my phone. When she arrived, I was folding laundry. She stood in the doorway, arms crossed, and launched into her rehearsed speech. "Mom, it's not enough for me to scrape together $500. I thought you understood how important this certification is for my career. Her tone was both hurt and accusatory. I took a slow breath, recalling the I statement technique my therapist recommended start with my own feelings, not her faults. Emily, I said, my voice steady. I feel anxious when I receive unexpected money requests because I'm trying to stick to my budget to protect my retirement. She frowned, taken aback by the word anxious. She shifted her weight. So you'd rather I drop my dreams than you manage your budget? She asked. Instead of defensiveness, I used the broken record approach, calmly repeating my boundary without extra justification. I'm sorry you feel that way, but I can't help with more than $500 this year. I paused, soft but firm. If you'd like, we can discuss a repayment plan for the $500 I can offer right now. My heart pounded, but I kept my gaze on hers. The silence stretched. She looked at the floor, then back at me. Fine, she muttered. 500. I nodded and retrieved my ledger, pointing out the family loan register sheet, where we'd agreed that anything over 500 required a simple repayment schedule. She signed the line grudgingly. The moment felt small, just a signature on a page, but it was monumental. I had spoken my truth, and she had respected it. A week later, a friend invited me to her monthly book club at the community center. I hesitated when my daughter asked me to cancel, since she had an extra job shift at the salon and needed me to babysit my granddaughter Zoe. My old instinct would have been to drop everything, but I remembered Dr. Elaine Larson's advice. A boundary is caring for yourself as much as you care for others. So I said, I'm committed to book club tonight. I'm sorry I can't babysit. There was a flicker of annoyance on Emily's face, but she didn't argue. She arranged alternate childcare. That evening, as I settled into the worn armchair with my tea and my friends, I realized how refreshing it was to honor my own needs. We discussed the novel, laughed over fresh-baked cookies, and I felt my stress melt away. For once, I wasn't living in a perpetual state of on-call. Of course, boundary setting isn't always so tidy. A few days later, Emily dropped by unexpectedly to borrow my car for errands, despite our previous agreement that she'd rent a car when I wasn't available. I had planned a midday yoga class. Seeing the keys in her hand, I felt the old guilt rising, but I took a breath, remembered my plan, and smiled. I'm headed to yoga today, I said. The car's not available. You'll need to rent one. She stared at me as though I'd sprouted horns. Mum, come on, she whined. You always say it's okay. I pointed gently at the small whiteboard in the hallway where I'd written our new ground rules: car use by appointment only, please book 24 hours in advance. Her face fell. She mumbled something about changing the rules, then left without another word. I felt a pang of sadness, my daughter upset with me. Yet beneath it lay the relief of knowing I could no longer be ambushed. That evening, as I stretched into my downward dog, I reminded myself that self-respect and respect from others grow when boundaries are clear and consistent. One Sunday afternoon, I decided to bring out what I called the family agreement. I printed a simple 2-page document that outlined our mutual expectations. The annual cap of $5,000, the repayment schedule for any amount over $500, the 24-hour notice for car use, and a clause that neither party would speak disrespectfully about the other regarding money or support. I invited Emily over for tea and presented it gently. I value our relationship more than anything. I want us to avoid misunderstandings and hurt feelings. Can we sign this together so we both know where we stand? She sighed, but then nodded. We signed side by side. The act of signing a ritual that mirrored our earlier loan register felt like planting a garden, a living promise we both had to tend. Over the next few days, I noticed her tone soften when she spoke about money. She asked, Mum, can we check our balance next month? Her willingness to collaborate warmed me more than any check could. It wasn't always smooth sailing. There were moments when old patterns threatened to resurface. One bright morning, I realized I'd forgotten about a kitchen repair bill due that very day. As I scrambled to find the funds, Emily arrived, cheeks flushed from a morning jog. She noticed my distress. "Need some help with that," she offered. My old self would have said yes without hesitation, but I paused and said, "I've got it covered. I'll figure this out." She stared, clearly disappointed, but she didn't insist. That night we sat down and talked more honestly than we had in years. She admitted she'd grown up expecting my help to be endless and took it for granted. "I never thought about what it cost you," she said, eyes downcast. "I'm sorry." I reached out and took her hand. "It's okay," I said. "I know you love me. Now let's learn together how to manage these things." We spent an hour mapping out her budget, setting realistic goals, and identifying areas where she could cut back, like dining out less often and selling items she no longer used. In the weeks that followed, our dynamic shifted subtly but profoundly. I no longer felt that knot in my chest whenever she asked for assistance. She no longer assumed my resources were limitless. Instead, we learned to talk honestly about money, just as we'd always talked about the highs and lows of life. That openness deepened our bond in a way that endless loans never could. I also reached out to my church community to lead a small workshop on boundary setting for other parents. I shared my stories, both the mistakes and the small victories, and offered practical scripts. "I'm sorry I can't. Let's plan this together. I need to check my budget first." People nodded, scribbling notes, and the room buzzed with relief as they realized they weren't alone. By the time my grandson Tyler's 10th birthday rolled around, the boundaries felt second nature. When Emily asked me to host the party, I happily agreed, but I also asked her to handle the cake decorations and the cleanup plan. That first combined effort produced the most joyful celebration I'd ever seen, laughter balloons and a shared sense of teamwork. After the guests left, I didn't feel resentful exhaustion. I felt proud that we'd created something together. Looking back, I see that setting boundaries wasn't about building walls between us. It was about establishing clear pathways for mutual respect. When I practiced I statements, I framed my feelings without blame. I feel overwhelmed when I used the broken record. I repeated my boundary calmly without justification or apology. "I'm sorry, but I can't." When I created the family agreement, I invited collaboration and accountability. These techniques transformed not only my relationship with Emily, but also how I treat myself. I no longer measure love by how much I give away. Instead, I recognize that love also means honoring my own needs and teaching my children to do the same. And that lesson that respect begins with clear communication has reshaped our family one gentle conversation at a time. Next, I'll share how building a supportive network and following a concrete action plan helped me stay on track for the long haul. That spring morning, I realized that personal boundaries and legal safeguards were only part of the solution. I needed a community to lean on, people who understood the delicate balance between caring for loved ones and protecting myself. So I clipped an announcement from the church bulletin's support group for caring elders meets every second Tuesday. That very Tuesday, I found myself in a bright room at the community center, a circle of folding chairs waiting. When I walked in, 5 others looked up: a retired school teacher whose son struggled with gambling debts, a veteran whose daughter drained his savings, a nurse whose granddaughter's living expenses had spiraled out of control, and 2 more gentle faces whose stories mirrored my own. We began with introductions over coffee and donuts, sticky-fingered sweetness that felt oddly comforting. Our facilitator, Linda, handed out name tags and a 1-page worksheet titled "Your 5-Step Protection Plan." The steps were simple but powerful. 1. Assess 2. Record 3, Consult 4, Act 5, Review. We each took a moment to jot down how far we'd progressed. I wrote steps 1 to 4 complete, step 5 pending. Seeing it in writing felt motivating. Step 1. Assess invited me to articulate my current situation. I shared how I'd capped annual family support, set repayment requirements, and installed banking alerts. Others nodded. I need banking alerts, said the school teacher. I'd never thought of that, said the nurse. Laughing at our collective aha moments, I felt less alone. Step 2. Record had me list where I kept documents, trust papers in a fireproof safe, POA copies in Marion's hands, my loan register spreadsheet on the computer, and printed copies in a red folder. Several members passed around their own binders, brightly coloured, tabbed, labelled. I realised I could improve my system by digitizing backups. That night, I scanned my papers into encrypted cloud storage. Step 3. Consult encouraged us to identify professional allies. I referred to my elder law attorney, my financial advisor, and my therapist. Mrs. Chen, the retiree, whose daughter ran restaurants, shared how meeting a credit counselor at AARP's free annual event had opened her eyes to practical budgeting tips. I made a mental note to attend next year. Step 4. Act meant implementing changes. My trust paperwork boundary conversations. Budget caps. I recounted setting up the family agreement and how I'd run that workshop at church. Several eyes widened. You led a workshop, they asked. I admitted I'd been nervous, but the warm turnout reminded me that vulnerability breeds connection. Step 5. Review was the one I'd postponed. Linda urged us to schedule quarterly check-ins with ourselves. Mark your calendar now, she advised. We all pulled out phones and set reminders. June 15th, September 15th, December 15th. Next March 15. Her gentle insistence made me realize that consistent review would keep me honest and resilient. After the meeting, the group lingered, swapping phone numbers and promising to form a support pod. My new friend Carol, whose grandson lived with her for 6 months after a divorce, and I agreed to a monthly lunch date to celebrate victories and troubleshoot setbacks. On the drive home, I felt buoyed. This was no longer a solo journey. That afternoon, I opened my calendar app and created a recurring event, quarterly self-check financial and emotional health. In the description, I pasted the 5-step worksheet. I set an alert 3 days before each date, so I'd have time to gather documents and reflect. Next, I tackled an item from my worksheet joining AARP. I filled out the online form, mailed my check, and within a week, a welcome packet arrived, a handbook on elder financial scams, invitations to webinars on boundary setting, and coupons for local community activities. Flipping through, I found a chapter on family financial agreements and copies of sample forms. I tucked them into my red folder. A month later, Carol and I met at the cafe near the church. Between sips of lavender honey latte, we compared progress. She'd installed text alerts on her bank account. I'd updated my cloud backups. We laughed over the small absurdities, a forgotten couple of invoices here, a cancelled repayment there, but celebrated each small victory. Carol's gratitude warmed me. You inspired me to speak up to my own son, she said, eyes bright. He actually apologized. I felt proud not just for myself, but for the ripple effect. Encouraged, I organized a mini seminar at our church fellowship hall, protecting your nest egg and your heart. I borrowed tables from the community center, printed copies of my 5-step plan, and invited Linda to co-present. To my surprise, 20 people RSVP'd, many bringing friends. We turned on the projector, shared personal stories, and practiced scripting gentle but firm responses. When one woman role-played, refusing her daughter's loan request, her hesitant, I'm sorry I can't turn into a clear unwavering. I'm sorry, but I'm sticking to my budget. The applause felt like a beacon. We were rebuilding healthy families one conversation at a time. Meanwhile, I put together my own action checklist on a magnetic whiteboard in my kitchen. Monthly review check, bank statements, update loan register, confirm trust documents safe. Quarterly self-check. Reflect on emotional well-being. Note any guilt triggers. Annual consultation schedule meeting with elder law attorney and financial advisor. Support check-in. Lunch with Carol or a podmate. Educational update. Attend one AARP webinar or community workshop. Every morning as I brushed my teeth, my eyes caught that whiteboard. It reminded me I was actively stewarding both resources and relationships. No longer reactive, I was proactive. One afternoon, I received a call from my neighbor, Mr. Alvarez, who worried his daughter was tapping into his credit card without asking. I invited him to the next support group meeting and shared the 5-step plan. At that meeting, he found encouragement in a case study about a banker's wife who'd almost lost her house. Seeing the solidarities of experience, he left with a binder and renewed hope. By fall, my pod had grown into a small network. We texted each other whenever an unexpected request loomed. Need to set a boundary. See my texts, we'd laugh and share suggestions. We even organized a fall potluck where each of us brought a dish and a one-sentence tip on self-care. Mine read, "Protect kindness with consistency. Saying no today preserves my yes tomorrow." As October's leaves turned amber, I sat down for my inaugural quarterly self-check. I reviewed my trust documents, all safe, my POA backups unchanged, and the red folder everything scanned and current. My loan register showed one small outstanding balance of $200. I reached out to my daughter who'd made good on her payments. We agreed to close that account next month. In my journal, I wrote, "Peace thrives when preparation meets practice." That evening, I joined Carol at our favorite Italian bistro. Over tiramisu and freshly brewed espresso, we toasted to resilience. She held up her coffee cup and said, "To the power of community." I nodded, tears in my eyes, remembering those lonely nights before I'd built this network. The journey wasn't without stumbles. I missed a quarterly reminder once and let a small invoice slip. My daughter tested my boundaries when she faced another unexpected expense. But each time I leaned on my checklist, I sent her a gentle reminder of our agreement. I spoke my truth calmly, and I reached out to my pod for encouragement. I never felt alone in those moments. Today I live in a place where generosity and self-care coexist. My garden blooms not just with roses, but with friendships planted at that community center table. My red folder and cloud backup stand guard beside my fireproof safe. My whiteboard checklist greets me each morning. And most importantly, my heart feels lighter, anchored by the knowledge that I belong to a community that cares for me as much as I care for them. If you find yourself walking this path, know you don't have to walk it alone. Seek out your local senior center online forums, church groups, wherever people gather with shared experience. Borrow that 5-step plan, adapt it to your life, and gather your pod. Because in the gentle strength of community, we discover that protecting our futures and our families isn't just an act of self-love, it's an invitation for others to love us wisely too.